Friends, today we will discuss one of the very important topic on international humanitarian law. The title of topic is Role of Humanitarian Agencies under International Humanitarian Law. Introductions of this topic. Human treatment in the extreme situation of war is the fundamental canon of humanitarian law. Those who are not taking direct part in hostilities, civilians, host the combat, are to be protected and assisted by the party to the conflict in their respective jurisdictions. Humanitarian agencies play a very significant role, particularly ensuring respect, implementations, monitoring, assisting and protecting the victims of armed conflict, as international humanitarian law is state-centric law and there is no treaty monitoring body as did in human rights law. The state and state alone undertake to respect and to ensure respect for international humanitarian law. Friends, this module will discuss the role of humanitarian agencies under the international humanitarian law in three aspects. First, international humanitarian law and humanitarian assistance in general. Secondly, role of International Committee on the Red Cross in the protections and humanitarian assistance to the victims of armed conflict. And lastly, the role and the responsibility of human rights and other humanitarian agencies in the protection of the victims of armed conflicts. Friends, let us discuss on international humanitarian law and humanitarian assistance. International humanitarian law recognizes that the civilian population of a state affected by an armed conflict is entitled to receive humanitarian assistance. That is in the form of food, medicines, medical equipments or other vital supplies to the civilian in need. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited under international humanitarian law. During an international armed conflict, belligerents or occupying power in the case of occupied territories are under the obligations to permit relief operations for the benefit of civilians, including enemy civilians. There are elaborated provisions under the Geneva Conventions and its additional Protocol 1 on this aspect. Friends, according to Article 81 of Protocol 1, parties to an international armed conflict must grant the International Committee on the Red Cross or other humanitarian organizations all facilities within their power as to enable it to carry out humanitarian functions assigned to it by the conventions and protocols in order to ensure protections and assistance to the victim of the conflict. Not only this, Article 23 of Geneva Convention 4 outline the basic principles applicable to relief assistance for particularly vulnerable groups among the civilian populations, like children under 15 and pregnant and nourishing mother. Article 70 of Protocol 1 says relief operations must be carried out for the benefit of the entire civilian populations if there is a general shortage of indispensable supplies. Friends, next let us discuss on role of International Committee on the Red Cross under international humanitarian law. Founded by 5 Swiss citizens in 1863, the ICRC is the founding members of International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. From the inception, the organization has been the leading role in the protections and assistance to the victim of armed conflict. The ICRC is mandated by the 4 Geneva Conventions 1949 and its Protocol of 1977 for giving assistance and protection of victims of armed conflict. Apart from the Statute of International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement authorize the ICRC to do the tasks. The role to be played by ICRC is enumerated in Article 5 of the statute. The statute enumerates that ICRC is to undertake the tasks incumbent upon it under the Geneva Conventions, to work for faithful application of international humanitarian law applicable in armed conflict, and to take cognizance of any complaints based on alleged breach of that law. To endeavors at all times as a neutral institutions whose humanitarian work is carried out particularly in time of international and other armed conflict or internal strife, to ensure the protection of and assistance to military and civilian victims of such events and of their direct results, and to work for understanding and dissemination of the knowledge of international humanitarian law and to prepare any development thereof. Friends, the International Committee on the Red Cross has a right of initiative that enables it to offer its services to the party in conflict, in particular with a view to assisting the victims, and its offer of assistance does not constitute interference in the internal affairs of a state. Its mission is strictly neutral and impartial basis. International Committee on Red Cross tasks are listed as follows: offer its services to the party to an armed conflict, visit to prisoner of wars and civilian detainees, act as a substitute of a protecting power, search for missing persons, reunification of dispersed families, provision of food, water and medical assistance to civilians, spreading and promoting knowledge of humanitarian law, monitoring compliance with and contributing to the development of humanitarian law, special protections and assistance to the internally displaced persons, refugees and women during armed conflict, providing advisory service on international humanitarian law to render technical guidance to the state and help their authorities to adopt national implementing laws and regulations, engaging in humanitarian diplomacy to make decision makers and opinion leaders such as parliamentarians, members of non-governmental organizations, journalists and other influential people to aware of humanitarian law and to gain their support in ensuring its implementations. Friends, in its activities to protect people in a situation of armed conflict or violence, the ICRC's mission is to obtain full respect for the letter and spirit of international humanitarian law. The International Committee on the Red Cross does this by remaining close to the victims of armed conflict and by maintaining a confidential dialogue with both state and non-state authorities. In the context of India, the ICRC is very limited. Even though armed conflict situations are prevalent in many parts of India, in particularly Jammu and Kashmir, North India and the Maoist affected areas. Among the most notable activities done by the ICRC is in 2011, ICRC individually visited 640 detainees held in connection with the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, monitoring their treatments, living conditions and access to medical care and reporting the findings confidentially to the authorities. With the Indian Red Cross Society, it seeks to assist civilians affected by violence in certain part of India as well. Friends, next we'll discuss on human rights agencies taking ISL as a part of their activities. In recent times, both intergovernmental and non-intergovernmental human rights bodies have become increasingly inclined to include humanitarian law in their activities. Factors stimulating this development are firstly the fact that their activities often take place in the areas of armed conflict, where, apart from human rights norms, rules of humanitarian law are applicable. Secondly, the noticeable overlap and indeed similarity in substance and often converse between the two bodies of law. The same act may constitute violation of both of these bodies of law. For example, the principles of right to life and of the inviolability of human persons are violation of human right and humanitarian law as well. Friends, the Geneva Conventions do not refer to United Nations. Likewise, United Nations Charter also makes no mention of international humanitarian law. UN purposes and principles are expressed in terms of human rights. By traditions, the United Nations refer to international humanitarian law as human right in armed conflict. Today, the United Nations Security Council, the United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Human Rights Councils increasingly refer in details to international humanitarian law in their discussion and resolutions. The UN Secretary General publishes regularly report on protection of civilians in armed conflict and his special representative on children and armed conflict report on violation of falling within his mandates. This tendency may also be observed in practice of UN High Commissioners for Human Rights and Refugees. Friends, on the regional level, the Inter-American Commissions on Human Rights is similarly very active. For example, in its report on Colombia of 1999, the Commission extensively reported on and analyzed the conduct of the parties to the armed conflict in the light of applicable rules of humanitarian law. Friends, next let us discuss on role and responsibility of humanitarian agencies in protections. Protection is all activities aimed at obtaining full respect for the right of the individuals in accordance with the letter and spirit of relevant bodies of law, that is, human rights law, international humanitarian law and refugee law. Human rights and humanitarian organizations must conduct these activities in an impartial manner, that is, not on the basis of race, nationality or ethnic origin, language or gender. Traditionally, protection by humanitarian agencies was largely understood as the province of mandated actors, that is, agencies with a specific mandate under international law to perform specific protection activities. Until the 1990s, protection in the humanitarian sphere was largely the preserve of two organizations, that is, the International Committee on the Red Cross (ICRC) and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, means UNHRC. Now there is proliferations of new protection actors, both mandated like UNICEF, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNESCO, World Health Organizations and Food and Agriculture Organizations, and non-mandated. Friends, UNICEF has become a key actor in developing country-level monitoring and reporting mechanisms related especially to the protection of children in armed conflict. The work of non-mandated humanitarian actors in protection is also of growing importance. For example, United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has a role in supporting the United Nations Security Council in its work on the protection of civilians. In this aspect, we may mention in the situation of Darfur in 2003, this organization assumed a leadership role in the protection regime. Non-governmental organizations have also become increasingly active in protections. For instance, the International Rescue Committee, the Norwegian and the Danish refugee councils have complemented national refugee resettlement programs with protections and assistance to refugees in the camps in partnership with UNHRC. Oxfam and World Vision have developed specially protection expertise in the programmatic areas like child protections in conflict. International Displacement Monitoring Center monitors conflict-induced internet displacement worldwide. The Geneva Conventions and its protocols clearly says about taking care of victims of armed conflict and providing humanitarian assistance and protection of civilians. The parties to the conflict must allow and facilitate rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief for civilians in need, which is impartial in character and conducted without any adverse distinctions. Traditionally, protection by humanitarian agencies was largely understood as a province of mandated actors. Until the 1990s, protection programming in humanitarian sphere was largely the preserve of two organizations, that is, the ICRC and UNHRC. Last but not least, international humanitarian law is certainly not a self-contained system, and its implementation is largely depend on states and international community as a whole. This decentralized structure of implementation is particularly inappropriate for the international humanitarian law. The general mechanism of international law to ensure respect and to sanction violations are even less satisfactory and less efficient regarding international humanitarian law than they are for the implementation of other branches of international law. In armed conflicts, they are inherently insufficient and in some cases even counterproductive. So, therefore, the role to be played by humanitarian agency and humanitarian agencies in providing protections, assistance and implementations are very crucial, particularly in humanitarian law. Friends, this is all about role of humanitarian agencies under international humanitarian law. Thank you for your patience.